Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars was released for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System on March 9th, 1996 in Japan and on March 13th, 1996 in North America. Paper Mario was released on the Nintendo 64 on August 11th, 2000 in Japan, February 5th, 2001 in North America, and October 5th, 2001 in Europe and Australia. Both games are cult classics. Both have been out long enough that they can be definitively called retro titles. Both occupy various people's status as the game they grew up with, aka their childhood game. For me personally, Super Mario RPG occupies that slot. Last but not least, they are also so similar to each other that they directly invite comparison and contrast with one another. However, because both have been out for so long, and both have entire generations of children who grew up with them, that means that a lot of their flaws tend to be overlooked because of those people's nostalgic goggles. I would like to put each of these games side by side and determine which one has the most nostalgic value from an objective standpoint. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new series on my channel. It's time to compare Super Mario RPG directly to Paper Mario and determine who nostalgias it better. Super Mario RPG begins with a bit of a hot start. It shows Princess Toadstool, as she was called in North America back then, picking flowers in Mario's garden, because apparently Mario's flower bed has better flowers for her to pick than her actual royal garden. When suddenly the sky turns dark, because apparently Bowser can do that. You know, this is the first time I've played this game with the intent of analyzing it. I'm less than a minute into the game, and already this is starting to make my brain hurt. And then kidnaps Princess Toadstool. After we defeat Bowser, out of nowhere a giant sword descends from the sky and lands right in Bowser's castle. Paper Mario's intro, on the other hand, is much more exposition heavy. It begins with a narration about Star Hill, how the star spirits, aka gods, grant wishes to mortals using shooting stars. This heavily mirrors the main plot of Super Mario RPG, but whereas the latter slowly unveils this plot as you play the game, Paper Mario seems content to simply dump the exposition onto the player before they even get to pick up the controller. Right out of the gate, Paper Mario is at a bit of a disadvantage when it comes to storytelling. Here's a rule of thumb for any aspiring video game story writers out there. We want our games to have great stories, but when it comes to exposition, less is more. With Super Mario RPG, the giant sword and the stars that fall from the sky are incredibly mysterious to a first-time player, and it's fun figuring out the mystery alongside Mario and his friends. Granted, Super Mario RPG is guilty of this in its own way, but that won't come until much later in the game. At least as far as the opening cutscenes are concerned, Paper Mario does a vastly inferior job of setting up the main conflict. As far as the first level is concerned, this is definitely one instance where the two games are on a much more level playing field. Both begin as random day-in-the-life moments. Paper Mario begins with a party at Princess Peach's castle. She had since been renamed to Peach in North America, so she now has the same name in both English and Japanese. Whereas Super Mario RPG begins with a dungeon. If this is your first time playing this game, the dungeon beginning actually works in the game's favor because it lulls you into a false sense of security, thinking this is going to be just another game where the main objective is to rescue the princess and nothing more, only to pull the rug out from under the player by suddenly introducing a main conflict that's going to be much higher stakes. Paper Mario, meanwhile, blew its whole wad in one go by telling us exactly what Bowser had done before the events of the game, so a fake-out like that wouldn't have worked nearly as well. Of course, that's not to say that Paper Mario doesn't fake us out. Because we are explicitly told that Bowser had stolen the Star Rod, we expect reclaiming it to be the main conflict of the game. While reclaiming the Star Rod certainly is the main objective, Princess Peach is also being held prisoner, and rescuing her also serves as a co-main conflict. Whereas Super Mario RPG fakes us out into thinking that it's going to be a standard Mario plot, only to swap that conflict out for one of much higher stakes, Paper Mario lulls us into a false sense of security thinking that it's going to be a much higher stakes conflict, only to regress back to the old formula of Bowser being the main villain and Princess Peach being the damsel in distress. However, the thing that really seals it for me is the first boss fight of the game. Both games have you fighting Bowser initially, but the way the two boss fights are handled couldn't be more dissimilar. As the fight starts, Bowser and the princess exchange some banner with Mario. Mario doesn't exchange any banner because he's a silent protagonist in both games, and the banner that is exchanged really sets the tone for the two games. In Super Mario RPG, Bowser begins the fight by saying, "Mario, prepare yourself for the great beyond." Almost instantly, this sets the tone as being much darker than most other Mario games. Bowser isn't gonna just beat up Mario in this fight, he's gonna kill him. Paper Mario, on the other hand, has Bowser only promising to beat Mario up. Get used to that, because it's going to be a recurring theme in this retrospective. Super Mario RPG has a lot of depth to it, on par with other, more grown-up RPGs at the time, like Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy V. Paper Mario, on the other hand, is meant to be, in almost every capacity imaginable, baby's first RPG. Everything about Paper Mario is heavily simplified, so as to provide the lowest possible learning curve and make it accessible to the youngest possible demographic. Now I know what some of you are thinking. Well, the Mario franchise are kids' games, so of course Paper Mario is, likewise, for kids. No, Mario is not for kids. Mario is family-friendly, and there is a big difference. If something is for kids, then it is meant exclusively for children, and anyone older than, say, age 12 is not part of the game's target demographic, whereas something that is family-friendly is accessible to children, and parents can safely allow their children to consume that material without worrying about them picking up any kind of bad habits, but there is also plenty for older audiences to enjoy about the material as well. To show you what I mean, let's take a look at the two live-action Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies. One released in 1990, with the turtles being people in rubber costumes, and another released in 2014, with the turtles being CGI. The 1990 movie is family-friendly, whereas the 2014 movie is for kids. My generation grew up with the 1990 movie. The fight scenes, costumes, wirework, and other special effects of that movie have not aged well in the slightest. But now that we've grown up, we can watch the movie again and see it in a new light. There's an actual story that the movie is telling beyond just stop the bad guy, specifically a coming-of-age story. There's a central theme of family in that movie. All the main characters contribute to the central theme in one capacity or another. Splinter is the adoptive father of the turtles and loves the turtles as if they were his own children. April keeps a junk store open part-time in memory of her late father. April's boss Charles and his son Danny have an estranged relationship that they repair by the end of the movie. And the Shredder is manipulating the concept of family in order to seduce the estranged teenagers of New York into thinking that they're a family so they'll do his bidding. There is very little of similar substance in the 2014 movie. It's mostly just a bunch of fight scenes, butt shots, and innuendos. Once the novelty of the fast-paced fight scenes wear off, and once you've gotten past puberty and the novelty of women's butts for its own sake is no longer appealing to you, there's very little actual story in that movie. Few lessons are learned, few characters develop beyond their archetype. The 2014 movie is not family-friendly, it is for kids. Likewise, the majority of games in the Mario franchise are similarly family-friendly. The platforming games have nice, colorful, cartoonish graphics and family-friendly characters, but the levels, especially near the end or perhaps even the bonus levels after the main game is completed, ramp up the difficulty to insane levels that children younger than 10 simply would not have the reflexes or hand-eye coordination needed to do. This provides some challenge to the older players who have stayed with the franchise all their lives. It isn't just for the kiddies. Paper Mario, on the other hand, is definitively for kids. There is hardly anything in the game that either challenges your gaming skills or causes you to look at the story at anything beyond face value. Just as the game dumps the exposition for the main conflict on the player right at the outset, there is likewise no need to think about the story at any other point in the game beyond what the game itself gives you at face value. In short, Paper Mario is baby's first RPG. Yeah, get used to that phrase because it's going to be coming up a lot in this retrospective. So when it comes to the question of who nostalgics it better, as far as the game's intro is concerned, the point goes to Super Mario RPG. The opening levels are roughly equal quality to each other, but the way Super Mario RPG sets up the main conflict, as well as sets the tone for the rest of the game, is vastly superior to that of Paper Mario. So as we begin the game proper, I think the best thing to analyze is the first thing we see in the game. Super Mario RPG was actually pretty revolutionary for its time. Everything in the game was viewed at a 45-degree angle. The map and battlefields were diamonds rather than squares, and the buildings were all slanted. While this seems like a weird design choice, it actually carried with it a unique benefit. It allowed the developers to create the illusion of 3D graphics in this game, despite the hardware it's designed for only being capable of rendering 2D graphics. The graphical style is now known tongue-in-cheek as 2.5D, and at the time this game was released, it was revolutionary to see this. Paper Mario, however, was released on the N64, which was already capable of rendering 3D graphics anyway. No camera tricks or optical illusions necessary. Paper Mario can no longer coast on the novelty of it being a 3D game, since that's to be expected by this point. So how do you stand out aesthetically when the game is a spiritual successor to a game that is famous for its innovative graphical design, when you yourself no longer have that advantage? Nintendo's answer? Opt instead for an artistically creative graphics design. Paper Mario, as the name implies, has a mostly paper aesthetic to it. The environment is 3D, albeit with a clearly cartoon-inspired art style, but the characters are 2D. Many of the characters even have black outlines around their bodies with white outcroppings around the black outlines, suggesting that they were cut using scissors from some coloring book. That is admittedly a creative art style. Seeing as there cannot be any true sequels to Super Mario RPG because Square Enix owns 50% of the rights to the characters and assets of the game, this paper art style has become the new standard art style for Mario RPGs. However, while it is artistically creative, it doesn't actually match the wow factor of having 3D graphics on a console that is supposed to be incapable of rendering them, although I realize that's subjective. But you know what isn't subjective? Super Mario RPG definitely has a graphical advantage over Paper Mario because the former game actually uses its unique graphics as a gameplay mechanic. Because the graphics are an illusion of 3D, that means that there are things that are in the game world but are not clearly visible, requiring the player to use his depth perception to figure out where these things are. These range from optional Easter eggs like the invisible NPC who is hiding behind the walls in Mushroom Kingdom and Rose Town, as well as the shortcut you can use in Booster Pass to instantly kill several enemies, to secrets that you have to find in order to complete the game, like the back door at the Marrymore Wedding Chapel. Of course, there is that dreaded 3D maze in the sunken ship, but that's only optional so I can happily ignore it. Paper Mario, on the other hand, while boasting a creative art style, it is exclusively just that, an art style. The only time I ever noticed the paper aesthetic actually utilized in the game was when I slept in a Toad house. Mario would jump into the air and swing back and forth in a pendulum motion like an actual sheet of paper in order to slip into the bed sheets. That's honestly about it. The paper aesthetic is never used in any actual game mechanic, which is kind of disappointing considering that the entire flipping game is named after this aesthetic, so you'd expect it to be kind of important. In the Portal games, the use of a portal gun to solve puzzles is the main game mechanic. In the Elder Scrolls games, the franchise's namesake artifact serves as the source of prophecy for the main quest in each game. That sounds like it should go without saying, but in this game there is surprisingly little Paper Mario, in either story or gameplay, in a game called Paper Mario. Granted, future games in the series rectify this problem. In Paper Mario the Thousand-Year Door on the GameCube, that game gives Mario the ability to turn into a human paper airplane. Super Paper Mario on the Wii gives Mario the ability to turn sideways in order to fit through otherwise impossible spaces, and so on and so forth. However, while future games do incorporate the paper mechanic into the gameplay, the key word, at least as far as this retrospective is concerned, is future games. So, no points awarded. Now I know what some of you are thinking. Unlike future Paper Mario games, this game has a behind-the-scenes reason why it doesn't utilize the paper aesthetic. Paper Mario was originally intended to be a direct sequel to Super Mario RPG, and was even called Super Mario RPG 2 in early development. However, as I alluded to a moment ago, Square Enix intervened and revealed that they owned half the copyrights to the characters and other assets from that game, meaning that Nintendo couldn't make any more games in that series without Square Enix's written consent. Of course, Nintendo and their developer Intelligent Systems had already sunk a great deal of money into making this game, and so they were forced to change the names to make them copyright-friendly at the last minute. For many portions of this game, this mostly came down to a simple semantics change, such as changing the name of the forest maze to Forever Forest, but for the game itself, they had to come up with a new name altogether. Up until this point in development, the paper aesthetic was mostly incidental, but since they were forced to change the name, they decided to just name it after the graphics style. This is how we got the N64 game where, despite being called Paper Mario, there's hardly any paper, gameplay, or story in it. In short, this game doesn't utilize its paper aesthetic beyond graphics because, by the time that became the game's name, it was too late in development for them to incorporate any such mechanics without them feeling ridiculously tacked on. Future installments in the franchise had the benefit of being developed from the ground up with the understanding that the game is called Paper Mario, and with that comes a certain expectation that the paper part is going to play some role in either the gameplay or the story, and so the developers were able to design the game with that expectation in mind. However, despite understanding this, I still have to dock points from Paper Mario. While the game may have a behind-the-scenes excuse, it is just that, an excuse. By arguing that this forgives Paper Mario for not fully realizing the ideas found in its title, is a cop-out, because we are comparing the game we got to a hypothetical game that was never finished. I see no point in reviewing a game based on what it was originally intended to be, because we will never get to experience that. Instead, the game must be judged on its own merit, based on the finished product. Judging it by any other standard is arbitrary, speculative, and unfair to other games. So regardless of what excuses Paper Mario might have, the bottom line is that it does not utilize its unique graphics outside of aesthetic design, whereas Super Mario RPG does. The paper graphics design is creative, but the point still goes to Super Mario RPG for having better graphics as well as using them to their full potential. Now, to the Paper Mario fans out there, take heart. Your game is currently trailing 2-0, but I have a feeling that it will make a comeback in the next section. First, let's get this out of the way right now. It is entirely unfair to simply compare Paper Mario's soundtrack to Super Mario RPG's soundtrack directly. The two games are on two completely different sets of hardware with two completely different sound cards. If we were just comparing the two soundtracks directly, Paper Mario wins hands down simply due to it having better technology. So instead, I will be judging the game's audio based on their artistic flair, as well as how well the audio actually complements and enhances the gameplay and story of each game. However, keep in mind that because I am judging the soundtracks based on those two criteria, that means that my assessment of this section will be almost entirely subjective, so please keep that in mind. That said, one clearly objective advantage that Paper Mario has over Super Mario RPG is that it boasts a much greater variety of music. While both Super Mario RPG and Paper Mario boast different theme songs for every city, every boss fight in Paper Mario has a unique score playing in the background. My personal favorite is the Koopa Bros theme. Here, have a listen. Super Mario RPG, on the other hand, has unique music for each city, but that's the only part of its musical score that isn't recycled across multiple sections. Sure, it has the occasional unique music. The Barrel Volcano theme is one of my all-time favorite video game musical pieces. but they definitely recycle a lot of music in this game as well. It uses the same music for Mushroom Way, Rose Way, and the first section of Cuba Sewers, Booster Pass, and Land's End. That's 5 sections of the game's map that use the exact same music. Bandit's Way and Bean Valley both use the same music as well. Meanwhile, with the exception of the final boss and super boss of this game, both of whom use unique music, there are only 2 boss fight themes in the game. However, one could argue that this limited soundtrack actually works in the game's favor. Specifically, the reuse of certain musical pieces can tip the player off about certain aspects of the game's story. For example, it is commonly debated amongst this game's fandom whether Punchinello, the boss of Mulville Coal Mines, is supposed to be one of Smithy's minions, or if he is just some random jackass who happens to be in a location where a Star Spirit landed. My belief is that he is the latter, and this is evidenced by the fact that his fight is accompanied by the regular boss fight music, not the music that normally accompanies the Smithy Gang members. But even if you don't accept that, hearing the right music can still tip the player off about plot developments in the right circumstances. For example, upon entering a city, if you hear this music, then you know that this area is currently being taken over by the Smithy Gang. Mac and his Shy Guys have taken over Mushroom Kingdom and forced its inhabitants to cower in fear. Bowyer is firing his paralysis arrows at the people of Rosetown just for sport, and the people of Seaside Town have been rounded up by Eurydifice and imprisoned in a nearby shed. So that begs the question, how does Paper Mario's music add to the gameplay or story? Well, it certainly tips you off about the story developments using its music as well. For example, entering Cooper Village for the first time, we hear this music. Meanwhile, entering Toadtown after defeating Tubba Blubba, we hear this music. Both of the themes are significantly more upbeat and bouncy than what the cities normally have, which tips the player off that the town is in an uproar over some menace happening. However, in my humble opinion, the music they use for these moments, while certainly energetic enough to convey the pandemonium that the cities are currently experiencing, are still too upbeat and happy to convey any real tension. Compare that to the music from Super Mario RPG, which notified the player that the Smithy Gang was in the area. That was slower and more stoic than what is used by Paper Mario, but it is also deliciously evil and warns of the danger. However, one aspect of the soundtrack where Paper Mario completely blows Super Mario RPG out of the water is the dungeon music. The dungeons are supposed to be the most dangerous enemy-infested areas in the game, but in Super Mario RPG, the musical accompaniment for these areas rarely fits the tone. Only 2 dungeon soundtracks from Super Mario RPG actually convey the sense of danger. The unique Bowser's Keep theme and the heavily recycled underground music. I said earlier that the Barrel Volcano theme was one of my favorite scores from Super Mario RPG, but it is out of place in a volcano dungeon. It doesn't make me want to keep an eye out for lava-based enemies, it makes me want to get up and dance. That's great for city music, but not so great when you're supposed to be risking life and limb by treading into an active volcano. Paper Mario also has a volcano dungeon, but its music much better conveys the feeling of tension as you are just a few feet away from molten hot magma. The forest music is another example of dungeon music where Paper Mario is hands down superior. Super Mario RPG Forest Maze theme is iconic, mostly due to the fan song Lost Forest, but the music never actually captured the sense of being lost in the woods. Paper Mario's Forever Forest theme, however, absolutely crushes it. I actually feel like I'm lost in a spooky forest when I hear this music. So overall, I would have to say that Paper Mario has the superior soundtrack. It handles the mood of the dungeons far better, and it rarely repeats any music across multiple locations. So Super Mario RPG is currently up 2-1. Let's see if Paper Mario can tie the game up as we move to... Both Super Mario RPG and Paper Mario have main plots that revolve around recovering stars so we can restore the power of wishes being granted. Paper Mario's plot, however, is not simply a rehash of Super Mario RPG's plot, because it was originally intended to be a sequel, not a remake, meaning that it still needed to tell its own story in order to be successful. As I said before, Paper Mario is baby's first RPG. As such, the tone of the story is constantly lighthearted. Even when the music is dark and creepy, like in the Forever Forest, the story always maintains a lighthearted tone. Even though Bowser is ruling the world for most of the game, we rarely see his handiwork actually disrupt the daily lives of the people of the Mushroom Kingdom. There really are only 2 times in the entire game when the daily lives of peaceful villagers are directly impacted by the work of Bowser's army. The first is when the people of Toad Town are being harassed by the Shy Guys who are guarding a Star Spirit, and the second time is when the plant people of Flower Fields are deprived of sunlight because of the clouds that are being spewed into the air by Huff and Puff and his flunkies. Compare that to Super Mario RPG, where you absolutely do see innocent citizens being terrorized by Smithy's forces. Super Mario RPG has much darker and more grown-up themes, including child endangerment, child abandonment, and having widespread feelings of fear, hopelessness, and despair because of Smithy's presence in our world. However, as I will demonstrate in a minute, that actually works in the game's disfavor. Stay tuned for that. One interesting difference I noticed about the 2 main conflicts is how they are instigated. In classic literary structure, the action which actually sparks the main conflict of the story is known as the inciting incident. In Super Mario RPG, the inciting incident is that the Star Road, the factory where all wishes are transformed into shooting stars before they fall down to Earth, has been destroyed by Exor as he was invading Mario's world. In Paper Mario, the Star Rod, not Road, is an item small enough you can hold it in your hand and has the power to grant the wishes of its wielder. The Star Spirits used this Star Rod to grant wishes, aka prayers, to mortals who found their favor while ignoring the wishes of supposedly selfish and evil people like Bowser. Frustrated at not having his wishes being granted, Bowser takes the matter into his own hands and steals the Star Rod for his own personal use. One of the biggest differences between the 2 inciting incidents is the proactivity of the villains. In Super Mario RPG, the Smithy Gang is initially just looking to invade and conquer Mario's world. It's only by pure happenstance that the Star Road also gets destroyed during the invasion. The Smithy Gang don't initially know about the Star Road. It isn't until one of Bowyer's arrows overhears Gino's exposition on the matter that the villains actually get the full scoop of what just went down. By contrast, in Paper Mario, Bowser already knows full well about the Star Rod and sets out at the beginning of the game with the express purpose of committing this story's inciting action. However, while Paper Mario certainly gains points for having proactive villain, I have to penalize it for having completely incompetent villains. Think about it. Bowser has the power of the gods in his hand. He can do literally anything he wants just by willing it to happen. So why doesn't he just wish for Mario to die? Why doesn't he imprison the Star Spirits behind some magical barriers that can only be lifted by the Star Rod? Hell, even setting all that aside, why does nobody on Bowser's team ever suggest that they beef up the security on Princess Peach's bedroom because she keeps managing to sneak out? Even if Bowser is too thick-headed to notice that Peach is using the fireplace to escape, And that's some pretty comical levels of thick-headedness right there, considering that in this scene, she's doing it right in front of him. There is no reason why Kammy Koopa wouldn't have noticed what Peach was doing. Everyone working for Bowser are f***ing morons. By contrast, the only act of true incompetence we see from the Smithy gang is the fact that Blade is late on 2 occasions. Knack and Bowyer are mostly just dicking around, but again, that's because they don't know yet about the star pieces or the star road. Once Smithy knows about that, he joins the race with star pieces. He aims to destroy at least one of them using a tool he calls Blade, but it fails to arrive the first time and is late the second time, giving Mario an opportunity to stop it. Aside from that, Smithy already has one of the star pieces in his possession, embedded on his chest. So why doesn't he just use Blade to destroy that one? By the time you finally meet Smithy, he says that he wants to have your star so he can easily conquer Mario's world. But then why even go to the trouble of destroying the star pieces from the sunken ship and Barrel Volcano? But I'll give that a pass since we don't honestly know Smithy's full plan. Maybe it would have made sense if we actually knew the particulars. The important thing is that the main villains of Super Mario RPG are a million times more competent than those of Paper Mario. That's not to say that Super Mario RPG doesn't have quite a lot of comically incompetent villainy to go around, but most of that is left to the side villains like Booster and his Sniffets, or Valentina and her inept minion Dodo. Another huge advantage that Super Mario RPG has over Paper Mario in terms of the main plot is that the stakes are constantly rising, whereas they are constantly falling in Paper Mario. At the start of Paper Mario, all the Star Spirits are captured, and everything Mario does from that point on is directed towards rescuing the Star Spirits. One by one, he rescues each Star Spirit, and he gains more star power as a result. This is not the correct way to tell a story. The best way to tell a story is by having the stakes constantly being raised. In order to raise the stakes have to start low in order to slowly rise. In Super Mario RPG, the main villains are just dicking around at first, and Mario is collecting the star pieces more or less unabated. However, when Eurydice announces his presence and reveals that Smithy is also joining the race for the star pieces, this throws a monkey wrench into the hero's plans. The stakes go up. That is how you build tension and drama. In Paper Mario, the only time the stakes actually go up is when Kammy Koopa develops a device at the very end of the game and just before the final boss fight increases Bowser's power so much that even the Star Spirit's powers cannot nullify Bowser's invincibility. Of course, that problem was resolved almost as quickly as it was brought up, so it barely even counts as a raising of the stakes in the first place. However, for me personally, the biggest sin that Super Mario RPG makes with its story, and the biggest advantage that Paper Mario has in regards to its story, is the morals and main themes of the story. Remember earlier when I said that the villains in Paper Mario were more proactive than those in Super Mario RPG? Well, as I look deeper at the two games, I am forced to acknowledge that it wasn't just the villains being proactive. In Super Mario RPG, there is an overall atmosphere of laziness and complacency, whereas in Paper Mario there is an overall atmosphere of proactivity and initiative. In Super Mario RPG, most people except the protagonists of the story seem quite content just sitting around while catastrophes are happening around them. They seem content simply wishing upon shooting stars to solve all their problems. We see evidence of this at Star Hill, where people's wishes are supposedly transformed into shooting stars. It's a fun little side quest trying to figure out who makes what wish, but has anyone ever stopped to think about the implications of some of these wishes? Some of them are reasonable, like, I hope my baby's cute, and I want to be a world-class baker. But then there are wishes that are f***ing sad. And I don't mean wishes like the one made by Mallow's parents. Oh, we'll get to that in a minute. No, when I say the wishes are sad, I don't mean they're tragic. I mean they are f***ing pathetic. Some of these wishes are wishing for the most basic of items, like some cricket jam or just some stupid food. Others aren't for the most basic of things, but the people wishing for them seem to be more content simply wishing upon a shooting star for their dreams to come true, rather than actually going out and making them come true. You want some food? Okay, why don't you go to the f***ing store? Do you think you live in the land of chew and swallow where food literally just falls from the sky? Compare that to Paper Mario, where we absolutely see people, not just the villains, actually take initiative and get stuff done. In Goomba Village, we see the patriarch of that family actually repairing the gate that was broken during the earthquake that happened when Peach's castle ascended to the heavens. Good on you, Goompapa! You actually did something in this game. As we enter Toad Town for the first time, we see there's quite a bit of debris keeping us from accessing the southern sections of the city. But when we return from Koopa Bros Fortress, we see that the people of Toad Town have actually done some elbow grease and cleared that debris out. When we get to Koopa Village, we initially agree to retrieve Koopa's shell for him, but as we're returning from that wooded area, we actually meet Koopa, who has resolved to be proactive himself. Granted, by that point we had already gotten the shell back anyway, but at least he went as far as to decide that he needed to be proactive, even if he never actually got the chance to be. Earlier in this retrospective, I mentioned how the tone of Super Mario RPG was noticeably darker, with people cowering in fear in the corner with an overall climate of hopelessness and despair, whereas everyone in Paper Mario still seemed to be living relatively normal lives, and only casually wondering where Princess Peach is. However, maybe this feeling of hopelessness and despair is being caused not by the Smithy gang themselves, but because the people of this world rely on the Star Road to do literally everything for them, to the point where they are completely unequipped to take care of themselves on even the most basic level without it. With the Star Road out of commission for the duration of the game, they are completely out of their element. Maybe the reason the people of the Mushroom Kingdom are just cowering in the corner is because they literally don't know how to do anything more than that. In Paper Mario, people are much more accustomed to doing things on their own, and so losing the power of wishes isn't nearly as big of a loss to them because they are already self-sustained. Now bear in mind, according to Gino, if the Star Road isn't working, that means that wishes can't come true. No amount of proactivity or personal initiative can make your dreams come true. On numerous occasions, the heroes make this perfectly clear, that whether your wishes come true or not is entirely at the Star Road's discretion and is not even the least bit in your control. For example, when speaking to Gaz for the first time since Gino joins the party, Gino says point blank that Gaz will not grow up to be big and strong by exercising, studying hard in school, and eating his vegetables. No, only the Star Road gets to decide how much of a badass he is when he's an adult. Later in the game, when Princess Toadstool is back in the Mushroom Kingdom, they explain that the only reason Toadstool is ever rescued after Bowser kidnaps her isn't because Mario is her knight in shining armor. No, it's actually the Star Road giving Mario the power to rescue her. Without the Star Road, Toadstool would stay kidnapped despite Mario's best efforts. So this isn't just a case of the people of this world being lazy. This is a case of the world itself being set up in such a way so that any attempt at living for yourself is an exercise in futility. A lot of people constantly ask for a sequel to this game. Well, aside from legal problems, I wonder if there even could be a sequel to this game without it being ridiculously contrived. How would you tell a story set in this world? Unless you completely rehash the main plot of the first game, with the Star Road being destroyed, then the established rules of how this world works remains that nothing the player does in the game will ever matter in the slightest because nothing of consequence ever happens in this world unless the Star Road wills it to happen. There would be nothing satisfying about that. You might as well just have the game play itself without requiring any input from the player other than to press the button to advance the conversations. Having the illusion of control over the player character is no better than having no control whatsoever. But if we simply rehash the main plot and destroy the Star Road again so that the player's actions have consequences on their own, then that would just be repetitive. Now I know what some of you were thinking. We do indeed see the occasional evidence of people acting for themselves and being proactive. The most significant example of this would be in Moleville. When the kids are trapped inside, everyone digs and digs to rescue them. To that I say, while their effort at rescuing the kids on their own is certainly admirable, you may have noticed that they actually make dick all progress in actually rescuing them. Think about it. The cave-in was supposedly caused by the star piece falling into the cave. This means that the kids have been trapped inside the cave since the beginning of the game. While we don't know exactly how much time has passed since Smithy's invasion and Mario's arrival in Moleville, I'd have to imagine that at least a week has passed. Despite the people of Moleville having that much time, and despite most of them doing this sort of thing for a living, they have made surprisingly little progress on rescuing the kids. Hell, the guys at the beginning of the mine even say outright, "We're getting nowhere fast." That is, of course, until Gino, a representative of the Star Road, comes along and fulfills the Star Road's role in wiping everyone's asses for them, at which point the kids are rescued in no time flat. Hell, even the people of Moleville outright abandon their mission of rescuing the kids themselves because why the hell should we do that now? We've got Mario doing the job for us. Hell, the kid's father even outright says that the protagonists will bring the kids back when he's good and ready. Those kids aren't our responsibility. What are we, their parents? So yeah, nothing the people do make even the slightest difference unless you've got the Star Road supporting you. Any attempts to do anything on your own are just an exercise in futility. Aside from Moleville, the second most significant example of people acting on their own initiative is Frogfucius. At the beginning of the game, he sends his adoptive grandson to retrieve a cricket pie, rather than simply asking the Star Road to drop a pie in his lap. And later on in the game, you can actually find some cricket jam and bring it to him, granting his wish with your own efforts, even while the Star Road is destroyed. However, neither of those are decisive evidence. With the cricket pie, the store clerk already knew exactly what Mallow was there for, even going to retrieve the pie before Mallow explained that the coin was stolen. So clearly, this was something that Frogfucius had already planned in advance before the Star Road got destroyed. As for the cricket jam, again, like saving the kids at Moleville, this only happens when Mario has a representative of the Star Road in his party. Hell, there is even a glitch where you can run away from a battle and, for a brief moment, jump onto the flickering bodies of the enemy you just ran away from, and then jump off of them like they were a static object. If you use that exploit, you can actually jump up to the top of the ledge in the Kira sewers, where the cricket jam is located. However, if you do that before the time in the game when you're supposed to do it, the chest won't actually contain the cricket jam. It will only contain a flower tab. Think about that for a minute. Even if you use sequence breaking, you absolutely cannot grant someone's wish unless the Star Road or a representative of the Star Road gives you his blessing. Damn. Now, some of you might reasonably wonder, why does this make Super Mario RPG's story bad? Well, the answer is because it's unsatisfactory. As the consumers of a story, the vast majority of people want to see the protagonist prevail because of his own grit and skill. We tend to feel copped out on when the day is saved, not by the protagonist's skill and self-sacrifice, but by some random act of God that is completely beyond the protagonist's control. Literary scholars even have an official term for this sort of cop-out, the Deus Ex Machina. Simply put, when we have a plot device like that in Super Mario RPG, which tells the characters in the story, and by proxy the people playing the game, that nothing they do in life actually matters, and that it's only because of some divine street that anything good ever happens to them, it just makes us feel like, well, like nothing we do in the game actually matters. That's why the Star Road is such an offensive plot device. And you know what, speaking of Frogfucius sending his grandson to pick up the pie, that actually transitions me to my next point. All across the game world in Super Mario RPG, we see example after example after example of completely shitty parenting. Frogfucius is the first example. He sends his grandson on an errand to go and retrieve a pie from the store. That sounds relatively harmless until you realize that this trip to the store requires that Mallow go unattended through Kiro sewers to get there. A sewers that is haunted by ghosts, as well as the fearsome Balome, who wants nothing more than to eat Mallow alive. Frogfucius knows about this monster, given that he warns Mallow to avoid Balome, and he sends Mallow through these sewers any damn way. Hey, I've got the munchies right now, so I'm gonna send my grandson into unspeakable danger just for a goddamn pie. Old wise frog my ass. Oh, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. When the Mushroom Kingdom is being invaded by Mac and his cronies, there are parents who are cowering in the corner while their kid is upstairs, and the parents literally just plain forgot about their kids. And a game that is littered with shitty parenting, literally forgetting about your kids is quite an accomplishment. But the worst parenting in the entire game has to be Gaz's mom. Now granted, she has a bit of an excuse. She seems to be running that in all by herself, which is probably a stressful job if she doesn't have any assistants, and she also doesn't seem to have a husband who can help her raise Gaz. However, even giving her those concessions, her parenting is still beyond shitty. Even giving her those benefits of the doubt, it is still absolutely astonishing that she allows her kid to keep a live firearm as a toy. Yeah, you think I'm joking, but if you visit Gaz after Gino joins the party, in addition to Gino giving exposition that nothing happens in this world unless the Star Road says it does, Gaz will also give Gino a finger shot. Gino can equip this finger shot and use it in battle. It's a real weapon! How is Gaz not taken from his mother's custody if she is that shitty of a parent? However, while that is certainly the worst example of shitty parenting in this game, we still have one more instance of shitty parenting to talk about. Mallow's parents. Okay, so Mallow's parents wish for Mallow to find his way home. Whoop-de-doo! Only problem is, the Star Road only recently got destroyed, which means that only the most recent wishes are being stalled. Mallow, however, has been raised by Frogfucius since infancy. Why are they only just now, 18 years later, wishing for Mallow to find his way home? Did they only just now notice that Mallow was missing? First of all, that level of inattentiveness takes shitty parenting to a whole new astronomical level. Second, how did they not notice that Mallow was missing? He's not exactly a quiet baby. He makes it literally rain whenever he starts crying. So, did they cast him out of the kingdom on purpose, and are only just now regretting their decision 18 years later? The fuck? Paper Mario has some shitty parenting in it. However, upon combing the entire game, I can think of only one instance of parenting that could truly be considered incompetent. That's when the Yoshi kids get lost in the nearby jungle on Lava Lava Island. The parents feel that the best response to this problem isn't to go into the jungle themselves to try and find the kids, but to simply run around in circles in their village and panicking. But hey, at least they didn't completely forget about them kids, and at least they didn't actively put the kids in mortal peril like Frogfucius did. So while their response to the problem is less than ideal, it's still light years better than the parenting we see in Super Mario RPG, except in Moleville. So in conclusion, which game has the superior main story? This is a tough one for me. It really is. I grew up with Super Mario RPG. That is my childhood game right there. But now that I have grown up and developed critical thinking skills, the main plot of Super Mario RPG has serious problems that Paper Mario rectifies. It relies on a deus ex machina to save the day, its side characters are entirely complacent, and the parenting in this game has to be seen to be believed. Paper Mario, on the other hand, boasts characters, good and evil alike, who actually take initiative and get stuff done. And while the Star Rod in Paper Mario is certainly powerful, it isn't presented as the be-all end-all exclusive means to obtaining your heart's desire. To hell with your own skills or efforts. Paper Mario takes the point for this round. It is now a tie game, 2-2. That leads us to... I will divide this portion of the analysis into 3 subcategories: the protagonists, the antagonists, and the recurring characters of Bowser and Princess Toadstool, aka Peach. That means that there are 3 points up for grabs in this section, so the stakes are high. First, let's talk about the good guys for Paper Mario. Along your travels, you will meet, in this order, Goombario, Kooper, Bombette, Parakarry, Bo, Watt, Sushi, and Lakalester. Your party members in Paper Mario are comprised almost exclusively of good or reformed monsters. Super Mario RPG had reformed monsters in Monstro Town, but none of them were eligible to join your party. However, a huge strike against Paper Mario is that, with the exception of Goombario, the companions don't really have much personality outside of their introduction. Kooper starts out too embarrassed to go after his own shell, only to learn to stand up for himself. Yay, character development! Only problem is, once he finishes that character arc, his character development is finished. From that point on, it may as well just be an inanimate Koopa shell that Mario kicks around to solve puzzles and navigate obstacles. There is that one moment in the path leading up to the Ice Palace near the end of the game when doppelgangers try to fool you into thinking they're the real Cooper, but that could just as easily been done with literally anyone. And more importantly, it doesn't actually develop Cooper's character. Sadly, every other companion in Paper Mario except for Goombario suffers the same treatment. Bombette and Watt both want revenge against their captors. That's it, that's their character. Like a Lester turns into a good guy. That happens over the course of 2 whole cutscenes. After that, his significance to the story is practically non-existent. The list goes on and on. Parakarry's lack of character is better hidden than most other companions, since he's involved in a game-long side quest of finding lost letters and delivering them. However, that's just gameplay right there. His only real character is that he's a courier who sucks at his job. Well, we get that much from the moment he actually joins the party. There's nothing else in the game that actually fleshes out his character beyond just being an inept postman. Even when he's delivering the letters, his dialogue is completely interchangeable except when he's addressing his delivery recipients by name. Goombario is the sole exception to this complete lack of characterization outside their introductions. Instead of just being a means of navigating obstacles and solving puzzles in the overworld, his overworld ability to tell you about the locations in the game show him to be a highly intelligent and well-read person. In battle, his Tattle ability has a gameplay benefit of telling the player about an enemy's stats, various forms of attack, and various weaknesses. However, they also contain numerous sarcastic remarks and wisecracks. He's not just smart, he's a smart ass. Because Goombario is the first companion you get in the game, and because there are new enemies being introduced as late as the final dungeon who can be tattled, and new cells where Goombario's overworld ability can yield new dialogue, Goombario's personality and character are allowed to shine all throughout the game. Unfortunately, Goombario is the only one like that. Of course, it didn't have to be this way. Paper Mario is an RPG, and RPGs are best known for their stories and the player's ability to manipulate the stories and characters through their own player choices. Imagine if there was a side quest where Bombette and Watt became best friends because they were both girls and they both had similar reasons for joining up with Mario in the first place, and so they develop a bond together that flourishes over the course of the game. Alternatively, imagine if there was a side quest where Parakarry admits that he's only taking the job of a postman despite sucking at it because his whole family worked for the post office and he's just trying to live up to the family tradition, and you can encourage him to enter a career field he's actually good at, or at the very least, one that he enjoys, and if his family can't accept that about him, then f*** him. Alternatively, imagine if you could get different comments from your companions when you speak to different characters in different conversations, kind of like in Fallout 4 or Dragon Age Origins. These sorts of things would have done wonders to alleviate the complete lack of post-introduction characterization that most of the companions suffer from. Now compare that to Super Mario RPG. The 2 party members you get are Mallow and Geno. You also get Bowser and Toadstool, but I'll discuss them when I discuss the recurring characters. This is certainly a case of quality over quantity. Honestly, and I know some Super Mario RPG fanboys are going to hate me for this, but Geno is just as bland as the Paper Mario companions. Geno basically just serves as a source of exposition about the main plot, and hardly anything more. Earlier in this retrospective, I praised Super Mario RPG for not simply dumping all the exposition onto us at the start of the game from some anonymous narrator. But aside from not being anonymous and not giving us the exposition at the start of the game, Geno's contributions to the main plot is honestly a little better. There are precisely 3 points in that game when Geno actually does something outside of battle. He tells Mario and Mallow about the Star Pieces and the Star Road after they defeat Bowyer. He tells Mario about Star Hill when he enters that place for the first time, and he tells Mario and Bowser about Smithy's factory after they defeat Exor. In all 3 of those instances, Geno is essentially a glorified exposition box. In Mushroom Kingdom after Marrymore, all the protagonists take part in bringing the royal court up to speed, so Geno is completely redundant in that case. In Nimbus Land, the exposition about the Star Road and the Star Pieces is handled off-screen, with Geno not even participating. I have observed precisely 1 character trait from Geno, and only 1. He insists that everyone refer to the Star Road by its proper name instead of using any synonym for road. That's about it. That alone, however, is not enough to give him a personality. It doesn't give him an identity, and it certainly doesn't give him any character development. Mallow, on the other hand, is probably my all-time favorite character in the entire Mario franchise. Yeah, I said it. Geno fanboys, do something about it. Mallow not only has a deep and rich personality and character, but he is probably the only protagonist or antagonist in either game who undergoes a full character arc over the course of the game. Remember, I said over the course of the game, so lackluster switch to being a good guy doesn't count. Specifically, Mallow's character arc takes the form of a coming-of-age story. These story arcs usually involve a character growing into manhood, taking on responsibilities, and losing his innocence. Mallow starts off as an annoying crybaby, sure, but that's done on purpose. He is given an intentional character flaw by the developers so that he can have something to improve upon as the game progresses. He starts the game as a scared little kid, unable to stand up to the bully who just stole his lunch money. With Mario's help, he is able to work up the courage to stand up to this bully. Later in the game, after we meet his grandfather, Mallow learns that he is actually adopted. While he is initially heartbroken at this revelation, he ultimately decides to accompany Mario on the adventure and find his real family. This is the next stage in Mario's character development. Whereas he previously needed help to work up the courage to stand up to bullies, now he is taking initiative on his own accord. Sure, Mario agrees to take Mallow with him, but that's in a whispered conversation. Mallow doesn't hear that. He made the decision to accompany Mario entirely on his own. Moving on, we enter the forest maze and begin the fight against Bowyer. This is probably my favorite Mallow moment in the entire game. Bowyer is shooting arrows with reckless abandon. Mallow is asking Mario to step in and save the guy in blue, Geno. Mallow initially says that he will stay back and attack from afar, but almost immediately after saying that, he charges into the battle right alongside Mario. He says that he's not afraid and that he won't cry. It appears as though he's trying to convince himself first and the audience second, but frankly, I'm already convinced that he's a badass. It was at this point, when I played this game for the first time as a kid, that I realized just how badass Mallow is. For Mario, this is just another day at the office to him. He's used to making these sort of death-defying leaps. He's used to charging at enemy projectiles. That's what he does. It's easy to be brave when you have legions of fans, a princess for a girlfriend, the uncanny ability to jump 6 times your own body out and be loved by all. It's quite another thing to be the underdog, not the smartest or best in shape, and still charge headfirst into enemy fire despite being scared shitless. Hot damn does this kid rock! So as we continue with the game, we eventually reach Star Hill. As I mentioned earlier, Mallow's parents are wishing for Mallow to come home 18 damn years after casting him out of their lives. But Mallow himself also has a wish. He wishes he wasn't such a crybaby. Sure, Mallow has a flaw, but at least he acknowledges that he has it. It takes more out of a person to acknowledge his own flaw than to deny it. Furthermore, he's actually taking steps to correct this flaw. Considering that making a request to the Star Road is literally the only way in this world for anything to ever be accomplished, he is doing the best he can. Also, notice how he reacts, both to his own wish and to his parents' wish for him to return home. He encourages Mario to step it up and find the star pieces. He might be a crybaby, but you know what he isn't? A procrastinator. This guy's on the ball. When he has a job to do, he doesn't rest until he's done it. Now, maybe you could argue that the wish from his parents is what's driving him forward, not simply the mission to save the world. Granted, he straight up says, everyone's counting on us, but some may argue that he's just giving a pretextual excuse. But then, when we get to Nimbus Land, he finds a kingdom full of people who look just like him, including a prince with the same name as him, and he's just all like, yeah, well, we need to find the star pieces. Yeah, save the world first, interesting kingdom full of people who look like me later. Now sure, he ultimately puts off the Star Piece mission to rescue his parents, but only after he receives confirmation, not just that his parents are in the area, but that they are actually being held prisoner. Speaking of which, the moment when the protagonists actually make it to the throne room is the moment when Mallow's character arc becomes complete. Notice how brave he is, how he isn't backing down from Valentina in the slightest. The guy who is standing here now staring down Valentina is not the same guy who cried a literal rainstorm when he got punked out for his lunch money. Over the course of the game, we see him standing up to bullies, taking charge of his own destiny, facing his fears, and now we see him as a legitimate hero. This is truly a beautiful moment. So, how do Paper Mario's good guys compare to Super Mario RPG's good guys? Well, while Gina falls victim to a lack of character development, Paper Mario is guilty of doing it a total of 7 times. Paper Mario opts for the quantity over quality approach to its companions, and it really shows. Goombario has a personality, but very little in the way of an actual character arc. He doesn't really change throughout the game. While Paper Mario has character arcs, they are resolved almost as quickly as they're brought up. I personally would rather have one truly excellent character arc than a half a dozen shitty ones. Super Mario RPG takes the lead again. Score is 3-2. However, Paper Mario fanboys take heart, because if there is one set of characters that Paper Mario handles much better than Super Mario RPG, it's with its villains. In Super Mario RPG, the Smithing Gang are just one-dimensional bad guys. As mentioned before, it was only happenstance that they destroyed the Star Road when they invaded Mario's world. Their only real purpose for invading Mario's world in the first place was conquest for its own sake. In fact, the game even draws attention to how little character depth the villains have by depicting these villains as anthropomorphic weapons. Exor is a giant sword, Mac is a dagger, Bowyer and his minions are a bow and arrow, Eurytovich is a spear, and the Axum Rangers are all humanoid axes. Hell, the Axum Rangers proudly boast how little character they have other than just being evil for its own sake. We fight for evil, we live for disorder. Those are their exact words. Paper Mario, on the other hand, has much more interesting villains. The Koopa Bros are typical fan favorites due to their chipper attitudes, more concerned with looking cool than actually getting results. They serve as the first major boss of the game for that reason. However, for me personally, the best antagonist in Paper Mario has to be Tubba Blubba, easily one of the deepest and most psychologically complex characters that the Mario franchise has ever boasted, and this is not a franchise that is known for its deep and complex characters. Most attempts to inject complexity into Mario characters are from fans, not the official games, but Tubba Blubba definitely has a lot of thought put into his character and backstory. When we first begin Chapter 3, the Boos are the only side of the story we get. They tell us that Tubba Blubba eats ghosts like them. When we head over to the nearby village of Gusty Gulch, we see Tubba Blubba devour a ghost while displaying no emotion whatsoever. This is a pretty gruesome moment for a Mario game, and it's made even more shocking by how emotionless Tubba is. This is a very cartoonish game. Intelligent Systems has shown numerous characters as being very expressive. When Tubba is defeated, he also becomes just as expressive as everyone else in the game. No, Tubba Blubba's lack of emotion in this scene is very much intentional. You will also notice that there is a patch on his chest, a not-so-subtle clue as to what recently happened to him. After we complete his respective dungeon, we learn that the secret to his invincibility is that he's had his heart surgically removed. After we defeat him, Bo tells us that the rest of the ghosts used to scare him just because he was such an easy target. So wrap your head around that for a minute. You've actually been helping out the bullies in this chapter. The ghosts were nothing but bullies to Tubba Blubba, and to combat this repeated victimization, he effectively shut down emotionally by removing the organ that, at least by cartoon physics, causes you to feel emotion. In other words, Tubba Blubba dealt with this constant bullying by, both figuratively and literally, turning into a heartless monster. I fucking love the symbolism in this chapter of the game. So the next time you're pimp-slapping Tubba Blubba into oblivion, think for a minute about whether you're actually the good guy in this scenario. So while Super Mario RPG tend to have the superior companions, Paper Mario takes the point for having superior villains. Once again, tie game, 3-3. So that just leaves the recurring characters. There are 3 characters who appear in both games. Mario, because duh, Bowser, and Princess Peach. Although she has a different name in both games, canonically it is the same character. In both games, Mario is a silent protagonist, so he has very few opportunities to showcase his personality. However, there are a handful of times when he does get the chance to do so. One of the most glaring differences between the two games is how Mario communicates with NPCs. As a silent protagonist, communication is a lot trickier than with protagonists who aren't silent. In Super Mario RPG, they actually turn Mario into a shapeshifter, a power he doesn't have in any other game in the entire franchise, and have him pantomime the story to the other characters. While this is certainly a creative way to have a silent protagonist convey information, it often leaves you wondering how often people in this world misunderstand Mario's pantomiming. I mean, if we didn't already know the stories he's trying to convey, his pantomime would be pretty vague and open to interpretation, don't you think? Paper Mario avoids the vagueness problem by having one of the weirdest mechanics for a silent protagonist I have ever seen. Mario actually talks to the other NPCs, but we never see any dialogue bubbles from him. That is just bizarre. He opens his mouth, no words come out, and then the NPC just repeats verbatim what they heard him say so the audience knows what Mario just said. In Super Mario RPG, Mario's shapeshifting ability might have come out of nowhere with no explanation as to how he got the ability, but this just completely breaks my suspension of disbelief. Why would the NPC always repeat verbatim what Mario just told them? Is Mario beaming the information into their brains telepathically, and they have to process the information out loud before they can reply to it? At least in Super Mario RPG, Mario's preferred method of communication organically lends itself to other NPCs having to say out loud what Mario is trying to say. Because the vagueness of Mario's pantomime requires that the NPC actually clarify what the message is that they're getting. If Mario really is saying these things to the NPCs out loud, and the audience is just the only people who don't hear it, then does Mario even still technically qualify as a silent protagonist at that point? It's fine if you want to have your protagonist talk, but you can't have your cake and eat it too. Either the protagonist is talking to other NPCs, or he's a silent protagonist. Pick a style and stick with it. In both Super Mario RPG and Paper Mario, Bowser's character is that of a completely inept, airheaded doofus. In Super Mario RPG, where the plot is mostly dark, he tends to serve as the game's primary source of comic relief. In Paper Mario, where the plot is already extremely comical and lighthearted, Bowser's airheadedness is cranked up to 11. In fact, the game even comments on this airheadedness, with Peach assuring Twink that it's still okay to use the fireplace escape route even though Bowser saw her use it just last chapter, because Bowser is a big fat idiot. You know Kammy Koopa also saw you use it, right? The point is that the game goes out of its way to portray Bowser in the most comically inept manner possible. One thing I find rather baffling about the way Paper Mario handles Bowser is he's the main villain. Granted, he's the main villain in most Mario games, but this is the only Mario RPG where he's the main villain. Since this is the second ever Mario RPG, it seems as if the developers just wanted to go back to formula, and that's a game design decision I don't appreciate. It's one thing to go back to formula if you try to break formula and the resulting game is negatively received, like with the Elder Scrolls Adventures Redguard. But it's completely baffling to go back to formula after you've already had a critically and commercially successful formula break, like you did with Super Mario RPG. What makes this even more baffling is that Nintendo is the last company I would ever expect to rigidly adhere to formula for the fear of losing profits. When I think Nintendo, I think innovation. They invented the D-pad, they invented shoulder buttons, they invented the use of a save feature instead of passwords. With Super Mario RPG, they invented the use of timed button presses to deal extra damage. Nintendo doesn't copy ideas, they're the ones who get their ideas copied. So why are they so afraid to break from tradition and keep Bowser as the main villain when no other Mario RPG before or since has done that? Princess Toadstool / Peach is hands down handled better in Super Mario RPG. As I pointed out, Paper Mario is a return to formula, which means that in that game, Princess Peach is just your typical damsel in distress. Sure, she's kind of proactive in Paper Mario, as she tends to sneak around and try and gather information, but frankly, it's mostly Twink who's the real asset in these scenes. Because he's smaller, he can stay hidden and therefore is in much better position to actually eavesdrop on people. He can also travel between Peach's castle and the surface at will to deliver messages and items. Frankly, the only thing Peach actually does in this game is carry badges and jam and gently over to the magic toy box so that Mario could pick them up on the other side. In Super Mario RPG, there's no two ways about it. Princess Toadstool is not only more proactive in this game, sneaking out of the castle so she can join Mario on his quest, but she's also much more valuable to the team. Her healing powers are completely OP. If you max out her defense with the lazy shell armor and safety ring accessory, you're pretty much set for the rest of the game. Nobody can touch you at that point. Her healing spells also remove status ailments, and her comeback ability negates the need for you to carry pick-me-ups. That's items that bring people back from the dead. On top of that, her personality is simply better in Super Mario RPG. Since she and Mario are separated for the entirety of Paper Mario, they really don't have many opportunities to have any great banter together. Her banter with Bowser is just, well, not very interesting. It's mostly just there to develop Bowser's character rather than Peach's. These conversations continue to portray Bowser as an airhead because he still has the hots for Peach and is constantly flirting with her, despite Peach telling him in no uncertain terms that she hates his guts. This isn't just a case of Bowser not taking the hint, because her language here doesn't even count as a hint. Rather, this is probably the closest that Nintendo will ever get to portraying a full-blown rapist who thinks that no means yes, and still keep an E for everyone rating. When you look at it from that perspective, you realize that Bowser's airheadedness goes from comical, lighthearted fun to being f***ing pathetic. And I'm 99% certain that's not what the game developers were going for. In Super Mario RPG, Toadstool, Bowser, and Mario spend the second half of the game traveling together, providing multiple opportunities for them to play off each other, including an absolute knee-slapper of a moment in Mario More Church when Toadstool moves in to kiss Mario, only for Bowser and or Booster to be the one who actually delivers the kiss. As Princess Toadstool herself points out, now that's one for the scrapbook right there. Sorry, Paper Mario fans, but the recurring characters in Super Mario RPG are just more interesting, more useful, and provide much better banter between each other. Point goes to Super Mario RPG. Super Mario RPG leads once again 4-3. So we've discussed the story, characters, and main themes of these two games extensively, but there is something I've neglected to mention up until now, and it's kind of important if you're designing a video game instead of just telling a story, and that is the gameplay. Remember way back at the beginning of this retrospective when I said that Paper Mario was baby's first RPG? I meant it, and the gameplay is where this dubious distinction really shows itself. Paper Mario's Overworld offers a greater production value than that of Super Mario RPG, but the way the player navigates it is heavily watered down compared to its predecessor. In Paper Mario, practically everything in the game, every collectible, every optional side quest, is in plain sight. There's hardly anything that's truly hidden. Notice this, the first star piece of the game. Star pieces are the secondary currency in this game, the equivalent of frog coins in Super Mario RPG. However, it's literally just laying out in the open. I'm honestly surprised nobody has come and picked it up yet. Whenever some static object, such as a bush, requires you to interact with it, either to find hidden objects or progress through the level, just walking up to it will cause a bright red exclamation mark to appear over Mario's head, completely eliminating any need for guesswork. Trees can be hit with the hammer for various rewards, or to have enemies drop down and attack you, but the trees themselves are in plain sight, and the rewards they drop don't differ from one playthrough to the next. The closest we ever get to any hidden secrets is having some star pieces hidden in the ground. However, even that's watered down compared to Super Mario RPG. You eventually get a badge that sounds an alarm whenever you're in an area with a buried star piece, so all you have to do is smash your hammer on the ground with reckless abandon until you notice a panel in the ground that wiggles whenever you use the hammer. Super Mario RPG has secrets and treasures, both hidden and in plain sight. Instead of hidden star pieces, the game boasts hidden treasure chests, containing a wide variety of goodies. Like with the buried star pieces, you eventually get an accessory that tips you when you're in a zone that has an undiscovered chest in it, but even then you still have to search far and wide to find the chest. Sometimes finding these chests are just a simple matter of standing in the appropriate spot and jumping, but sometimes they are extremely well hidden and require either an online guide or some serious thinking outside the box to find. For example, there is this hidden chest, the first hidden chest in the game. That is not a sequence break, ladies and gentlemen. That is how the developers fully intended for you to get that hidden chest. Then there are times that feel like you're completely glitching the game, like so. Again, that is not an out-of-bounds glitch. That is what you are supposed to do. Super Mario RPG's hidden overworld secrets extend beyond just the hidden treasure chests. For example, there's this moment where, much like the aforementioned out-of-bounds treasure chest, you were supposed to actually walk out of the normal boundaries of the game map to catch this guy, which is the only way to acquire the most powerful weapon and armor in the game. Then there's the elusive Great Guy's Casino, a place that is referenced as early as the Mushroom Kingdom and is referenced on numerous occasions throughout the game. It is hidden astonishingly well. You have to jump at the right moment, but that alone isn't enough. Once you've found the correct spot, you have to jump in that spot 3 times in a row to make the platform appear. I can totally buy that people in universe would search their entire lives and never find this place. Of course, Super Mario RPG is still intended for people of all ages, so the excessively obscure treasures need to be restricted to optional side objectives. Fortunately, Super Mario RPG does just that. None of these super hidden things are actually required to beat the game. Take, for instance, this segment where you're supposed to go from one floating Koopa shell to the next in order to scale the giant wall. The game times how long it takes for you to reach the top, and you get a reward if you're fast. But if all you care about is progressing to the next section of the game, you can take as long as you want to wait for the Koopas to float next to each other so you can simply walk over to the next shell without even having to jump. It's a perfect balance. It's easy for those who just want to beat the game, but challenging for those who want to get the most out of the game they possibly can. By contrast, consider this moment in Paper Mario when Princess Peach is tasked with baking a cake for Gourmet Guy. By the way, side note, a princess has to do her own damn cooking for a change. This should have been the comedic highlight of the entire game. Peach should have been constantly tripping over her own shoelaces as she found herself completely out of her element. Instead, not only is this segment practically devoid of slapstick comedy, but it's also ridiculously easy, and there is no increased reward for obtaining any optional parameters. Case in point, there's a spot in this segment where you're supposed to put the cake in the oven for 30 seconds. I wonder why the instructions don't specify a temperature, but whatever. The important thing is that, when I was a kid, this was always the moment in the cake making process that caused me the most stress, since I always assumed that this would have to be the easiest to screw up. Well, as I learned many years later from a YouTuber named Strider7X, it turns out that the game will accept the cake if it is left in the oven for anywhere between 23 and 36 seconds. That's a margin of error of 13 whole seconds. I'm sorry, but even if this is baby's first RPG, that is just too lenient of a time frame. Paper Mario's overworld puzzles suffer in nearly every other aspect, all because of one fatal flaw in the game design. You can only have one companion out at a time. Because of that, and because each companion only ever has one overworld ability, that means that unless you're sequence breaking, puzzles can never require any higher level of thinking beyond simply switch to the appropriate companion and use his or her overworld ability. On top of that, the companion you're supposed to use in any given situation is always painfully obvious. Oh look, a crack in the wall! I wonder which companion I'll need for this obstacle. This is the last dungeon of the game, guys. There is no excuse for the puzzles being this easy. If you could have at least 2 companions out at a time, then maybe puzzles could be set up in such a way that they require creative use of both overworld abilities at one time, like sending Cooper to activate an invisible switch that you need Watt to be able to see, or using Sushi to dive underwater while using Bo to phase through a sewer grating. As it stands, however, the restriction on only having one companion out at a time means that puzzles that use the companion's overworld abilities can never be too complex, and the overworld suffers immensely as a result. You wouldn't even have had to sacrifice any existing functions to do it. As it stands, Up C on the original N64 controller merely brings up your status bar, which shows your health, flower points, etc. As it stands, the R button doesn't appear to do anything in this game, at least not anything obvious. Couldn't you have just set that to be what the R button does, while the Up C button activated the secondary companion's overworld power? Considering that the R button isn't even being used for anything currently, such as workaround seems to be too easy for the developers not to have thought of it. Instead, it seems more likely that they just made the conscious choice not to do this because they wanted Paper Mario to be baby's first RPG. Super Mario RPG strengthens its lead, 5-3. Of course, the overworld is only one aspect of the game design. There's also the locations that are inherently hostile to the player. That leads us to... Because Paper Mario was originally intended to be a direct sequel to Super Mario RPG, many of the locations in Paper Mario are heavily modeled after other locations in Super Mario RPG. Shooting Star Summit is clearly supposed to be Star Hill, Forever Forest is clearly supposed to be the Forest Maze, right down to having a very similar gimmick, Mount Lava Lava is clearly supposed to be Barrel Volcano, and so on and so forth. In many ways, these locations are what inspired me to do this retrospective analysis in the style of a comparison contrast in the first place, rather than two different retrospectives about two different games, because they are so similar and therefore invite the most direct side-by-side comparisons. First, the Forest Maze is hands down better than the Forever Forest, music notwithstanding. Remember, I actually criticized Super Mario RPG for having background music for Forest Maze that, while catchy, completely failed to capture the feeling of being lost in the woods, while Paper Mario crushed it. While Paper Mario has superior background music for such an environment, Super Mario RPG does literally everything else better with this dungeon. First, the dungeon's 4 paths gimmick only shows up at the halfway point. Up until then, it's a fairly linear stretch. This means that on a first-time playthrough, the player is in for a shock when he finds that the dungeon actually takes him back to the halfway point if he makes a wrong turn. In Paper Mario, an NPC, who we never meet again, outright tells us about this gimmick at the start of the dungeon, completely ruining the element of surprise. Super Mario RPG doesn't tell the player that this is how the dungeon works. They just pick up on this point by playing the game and noticing the pattern, which is always more satisfying. Also, while you are supposed to go to a certain path in order to complete the dungeon, there is an alternate path where you can find some pretty good loot. You can learn about this secret if you speak to a guy in Rosedale, but the path is there even if you don't speak to him. In Forever Forest, there don't appear to be any branching paths. Sure, there's the occasional treasure to be acquired by going into the center of whatever sector you're currently in, but there's no incentive to go exploring in alternate directions because any direction other than the one you're meant to go through will just take you back to the entrance. Then there's the fact that navigating the Forever Forest is just way too easy. In Forest Maze, you're supposed to follow Geno to make it to the boss fight, but there are some sections where the Geno doesn't appear and so you have to guess which way he went. Even in sections where he does appear, he's only on screen for about a second, so you have to be quick if you want to see the correct direction. I suppose intelligent systems wanted the player to be able to figure out where to go without trial and error, so you're told to go through the exits that look different than the others. However, because this is Baby's first RPG, the differences between the correct path and the wrong ones are completely obvious. We're talking Sesame Street or Blue's Clues levels of easy to spotness here. The only way it could have been more insulting to our intelligence is if the bushes next to the exits were one solid color, and we were just told to go through the red exits and ignore the blue ones. If they really wanted this to be a challenge, they would have made the differences a lot more subtle than this. Kind of like those magazine puzzles where the reader was shown 2 similar pictures and encouraged to spot the differences between them. Maybe it would have resulted in a few failed attempts. Then again, there is no success without failure. Besides, there's only about 5 sections in this forest with 4 branching paths per section, so even if the push came to shove, trial and error was still a feasible option, seeing as there were only 20 possible combinations of paths you could possibly take. The point is that, While intelligent systems may have had good intentions by wanting to make the Forever Forest into a consistently winnable game of skill rather than a guessing game based on trial and error, they overcompensated to the point of it requiring virtually no skill whatsoever, which is kind of defeats the purpose of turning it into a skill-based mechanic in the first place, don't you think? So now that I've gotten my frustrations about Forever Forest out of the way, let me appease the Paper Mario fans by saying that, with the exception of Forever Forest, the dungeons are one of the few purely gameplay-related aspects of Paper Mario that actually outshines its predecessor. I entered this retrospective expecting to rip Paper Mario over the coals for having ridiculously linear dungeons, where you never hold more than one dungeon key at a time, and never allowing any branching paths. However, the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the dungeons in Super Mario RPG were guilty of much the same thing. There was almost always one linear path to the end of the dungeon, deviating from the straight line only temporarily to pick up some treasure before going right back on the beaten path. And in most cases, like in Booster's Tower, after you've gotten the Masher, actually retreading parts of the dungeon you had already completed. Frankly, if I'm being as fair as I possibly can, I can't rip on Paper Mario without simultaneously ripping on Super Mario RPG. Koopa Bros Fortress is the only dungeon in Paper Mario that feels truly bland and generic, but it's the first major dungeon in the game, so that's excusable. By the time you do this dungeon, you'll only have gotten 3 companions, and only 2 of them can actually be used to solve puzzles with, so having more complex dungeon design just wouldn't have worked. Each of the major dungeons after that point have something unique about them that causes them to feel rather unique, and not just in their aesthetics either. Dry Ruins has a mechanic where you have to drain the sand out of the ruins to open the way to the boss. Tubba Blubba's Castle has an interesting mechanic involving navigating the giant furniture using some weird platforming. Shy Guy's Toy Box has a side quest where you return the various stolen items to their rightful owners, causing you to constantly go in and out of the box. Mount Lava Lava is the inverse of Dry Ruins. Instead of having the dungeon be filled up and having to drain it, it starts empty and you're racing against the clock to complete the dungeon and escape before it fills up with lava. The Crystal Palace has a lot of puzzles that revolve around the use of reflections, and Flower Fields has this really convoluted set of steps that you have to ground pound in the correct order to make it across. Honestly, these dungeons all have really interesting mechanics to them. By contrast, the differences in most of the dungeons in Super Mario RPG are almost entirely cosmetic. Hell, Bandit's Way and Bean Valley are literally just palette swaps of one another. Booster Tower is basically just a linear path to the top. Sunken Ship has the occasional puzzles, but none of them are required to complete the dungeon. They only provide clues to the password, but the password doesn't change between playthroughs, so if you already know the password, you can just enter it and bypass the puzzles. Only Bowser's Keep has any mandatory puzzle solving to complete the dungeon. Sure, the puzzles in Paper Mario are extremely simple for reasons I've already discussed, but the fact that they exist in the first place alone puts them above those in Super Mario RPG, at least insofar as the dungeon progression gates are concerned. Everything else I criticized about Paper Mario, including its mechanical handling of the puzzles and how very little outside-the-box thinking goes into retrieving most of the treasure in the overworld, that all still stands. However, for the dungeons, I have to give the point to Paper Mario. Paper Mario now trails by 1.5 to 4. However, the dungeon layout is only one aspect of the dungeons. Dungeons serve as hubs for enemies, and enemies mean Super Mario RPG handled combat much like RPGs of its time did. Battles were turn-based. Characters took their turns in order from highest to lowest speed stat. Damage inflicted was based on the appropriate attack stat of the attacker, mitigated by the appropriate defensive stat of the person being attacked. For the most part, this was standard fare at the time for how RPGs worked. However, Super Mario RPG added a new mechanic that, at the time, was praised by critics as being downright revolutionary: the power of timed hits. In other RPGs of the time, you could score what were known as critical hits, which dealt extra damage, but they always happened at random. Once you selected your attack, the character performed the animation and the resulting damage was inflicted without any further input from the player. players' ability to be good at combat in those games was more about proper menu navigation than actual mechanical skill from the player. Super Mario RPG changed that. For the first time, players could control their critical hits by pressing the attack button at the proper time during the attack animation, or by engaging in some other type of controller input such as rotating the D-pad or pressing a certain button repeatedly without regard to timing. That alone would have made Super Mario RPG a revolution for the RPG genre, but Nintendo and Square took it a step further. They added in timed blocks, as well as timed offense. By pressing the B button at the proper moment during an enemy attack, the player can mitigate the damage done to them, and if they time their button presses perfectly, incoming damage can be eliminated altogether. Whether you are able to do this is not based on any RNG, it is exclusively timing based. If you become a master of timed hits, you can rack up absolutely astonishing levels of damage. Take the super jump for example. If you can get a timed hit on the super jump, Mario will jump on the enemy again. If you can get the timed hit for the second jump, you jump on the enemy a third time, and a fourth, and a fifth. With each successive jump, the window of opportunity to press the button to continue jumping gets smaller and smaller. After about 12 to 13 consecutive jumps, all subsequent jumps require frame-perfect timing, but the window of opportunity will always be at least one frame, allowing you to continuously jump on enemies theoretically indefinitely. The game even encourages you to do this. In Monstro Town, there are not one but 2 rewards you can get if at some point in the game you manage to land 30 and then 100 consecutive jumps in a single turn. Paper Mario takes this mechanic and completely shits all over it. They call their version of this mechanic the action command, and it has just enough of the original mechanic to make it feel like a shameless ripoff of the original rather than the next logical step for such a mechanic. First, a minor complaint. You can't do the action command at all until Twink gives you the lucky star. In Super Mario RPG, you can use timed hits in the prologue dungeon, you can take out King Link, the boss of the prologue dungeon, in only 2 hits if you can score 2 timed jumps on him. In Paper Mario, even if you absolutely know how to do the action command, the game simply will not let you do it until you get the lucky star. I never quite understood this restriction. It's not like the ability to do an action command before this would have completely unbalanced the game. Up until this point, you were only fighting Goombas. But that's ultimately small potatoes compared to the rest of the way this mechanic is handled. Unlike the Overworld puzzles, the action command in Paper Mario actually requires some timing and has a fairly strict window of opportunity to make the action command work. The problem comes not with the offensive nature of this mechanic, but with its corresponding defensive nature. You can block enemy attacks to reduce damage, but no matter how good your timing is, a successful block will only reduce your incoming damage by 1 point unless you have badges that improve that defense. In Super Mario RPG, net damage is determined by taking the offensive damage of the attack and dividing it by the other character's corresponding defensive stat, with a 50 or 100% of that damage being taken away depending on timed blocks. In Paper Mario, it's a subtraction problem rather than a division problem, presumably because Paper Mario's target audience is still a couple of years away from learning division and percentages. This means that, except for enemies that already deal 1 point of damage anyway, you cannot consistently avoid damage. This completely butchers the whole point of this mechanic, the ability to win even the toughest of fights at the lowest of levels because of your own skill. I've seen speedruns of Super Mario RPG where entire bosses are defeated in a single turn because of continuous super jumps.
That's it.
First try super jumps, that is just incredible.
However, because Paper Mario is baby's first RPG, the Power Bounce, Paper Mario's equivalent to the Super Jump, actually puts a cap on how many consecutive jumps you're able to do before it actively cuts you off from doing any more.
So there are also things called Power Bounce caps, where the game will just stop you at certain points, and even if you hit the action command perfectly, you won't be able to continue.
Think about that for a minute. whereas Super Mario RPG allows you to become as powerful as your skills will allow, and even offers rewards if you manage to pull it off. Paper Mario not only offers no such rewards for skilled behavior, but actively prevents you from getting super good at the game. Frankly, I find this mechanic to be on par with essential NPCs in the Elder Scrolls games. As Samuel Online once put it,
You know, it is a special kind of patronizing when a game not only tells you that it's not a good idea to kill such and such, but holds your hand and simply won't let you.
did the developers feel that allowing infinite power bounces would make the fights too easy? Because, newsflash, fights in Paper Mario are already stupidly easy. Remember, this is Baby's first RPG. The vast majority of enemies will never attack your partner's only Mario, and like in the Overworld, you can only have one companion out at a time. This means that there are very few instances where very complex combat strategy is even possible, and therefore, combat in Paper Mario is extremely simplistic. In Super Mario RPG, you can have two people in combat in addition to Mario, allowing you to create teams of fighters who can complement each other and create unique combinations of attacks. Because any of your three fighters are open to being attacked, that means you have to equip all three of your fighters with proper defense. Paper Mario, in the already rare event that your partner gets attacked, that only has the effect of putting him out of commission for a set number of turns. Speaking of which, that's my next gripe against Paper Mario's combat system. There aren't enough variety in status ailments. In Super Mario RPG, there are 6 status ailments in the game, and all of them did something different. Sleep disabled all actions, Mute disabled special attacks, Scarecrow disables items and regular attacks, Mushroom disables all actions but also causes the character to gradually restore their health, Poison disables no actions but causes the character to suffer gradual damage, and Fear disables no actions but reduces attack and defense by half. In Paper Mario, they were apparently worried that too many different status ailments would confuse their target demographic, the under kindergarten age group, so they only really have 2 types of status ailments, Poison and everything else. Poison causes the infected character to take continuous damage like you'd expect, but literally every other status ailment has the same effect, rendering that character unable to attack for a duration of turns. It doesn't matter if the character is asleep, frozen, dizzy, or frozen in time, they are all the same. They just disable the character's actions until the duration wears off. There's no option to mute enemies, no option to reduce their defense, no option to make their attacks easier to block. This is Baby's first RPG, and so we don't want to confuse them with too many status ailments. When it comes to combat, Super Mario RPG takes the point hands down. It has more strategy, more variety, more control over the pace of the battle, more opportunities to get really good at the game, and rewards for getting so good. Paper Mario's combat system is inferior in nearly every way. The biggest aspect of any RPG gameplay isn't just leveling up your character, it's getting superior equipment. Thus, whichever game has the superior mechanic for upgrading your gear and characters is a very important question when asking who nostalgias it better. Super Mario RPG opts for a more standard equipment system. Every character has weapons, which increase the character's attack damage, armor, which reduces the character's incoming damage, and accessories, which can have a wide variety of effects. Each weapon is unique to a specific character, most armors are unique to a specific character, but some can be equipped by anyone, and most accessories can be equipped by anyone, but there are a few that are character specific. Level ups are also handled in a more traditional sense. You fight enemies, you gain experience points. Gain enough experience points and you'll level up. The amount of experience you need to gain the next level gets higher with each level you gain. When you level up, all your stats increase, but then you have the option of increasing one category of stats even higher. This contributes to what little custom character builds the game offers. You can dump all of Mallow's level up bonuses into magic since he's best as a pure mage, or you can divide the bonuses evenly if you are so inclined. Paper Mario's leveling system is heavily simplified compared to that of Super Mario RPG. Instead of experience points, it uses a stat known as star points. While this alone is merely a cosmetic change, the problem comes not with what they're called, but with how they're executed. You will always need 100 star points to level up regardless of your current level. Instead of requiring more experience to level up further, the game instead reduces the amount of experience you get from taking out enemies. After a certain level, the weaker enemies will stop giving out experience altogether. While this doesn't sound like an inherently problematic game mechanic at first glance, it has the consequence of you being unable to grind experience too much. In Super Mario RPG, you can exit an area of the game, immediately re-enter, and fight the same enemies over and over again for infinite experience. In Paper Mario, you can re-enter levels and the enemies will have respawned, but fighting them again doesn't do you much good unless you're grinding for coins. Now, why is this such an inherently poor mechanic? Well, remember earlier when I criticized Paper Mario's limitation on power bounces by placing a cap on the number of times you can consecutively hit the same enemy? Well, this is another manifestation of that game design philosophy. The game is so averse to letting you play it in any way other than the exact way the developers intended that it actively prevents you from trying to circumvent the game's limitations. Everything from combat to the world and dungeon design to even the leveling system is designed to keep the player constantly on the straight and narrow. Super Mario RPG is considered by modern standards to be a linear RPG. You can't exactly do sunken shit before you complete Mary Moore and so on. But the linearity of Paper Mario makes Super Mario RPG look like Skyrim by comparison. When you level up, Paper Mario is also much more shallow than Super Mario RPG. First, your companions don't level up with experience, they only level up when you use these things that are generically called super blocks. So Mario is the only one who levels up from experience. When he does level up, however, it's an incredibly shallow process. You can only level up health, flower points, and badge points, more on them in a minute. Also, you can't auto-raise all your stats, you can only raise one at a time. Now, some may argue that this encourages you to be more strategic with your level up choices, since the game doesn't just auto-level you to keep you from falling behind. You don't want to pump every level into FP, because then you won't be able to tank some of the in-game hits, whereas Super Mario RPG essentially provides training wheels, so you can't fall behind even if you wanted to. Well, no, not really. As I mentioned earlier, Super Mario RPG uses equipment as a means of improving your characters just as much as it uses leveling. There were multiple times in my first playthrough of Super Mario RPG as a kid that I found myself stuck on several bosses because I had focused entirely on one aspect of the game rather than all the necessary elements at once. Croco, Mac, hell, even the Hammer Bros all forced me to notice the various game mechanics in order to get past them. Playing this game as a kid gave me my first taste of that satisfaction you get when you defeat a boss after your 100th try, which I later learned was a staple of video games as a whole. I never encountered such difficulty spikes in Paper Mario. My first playthrough of that game was smooth sailing. I think I died once in my first playthrough of Paper Mario. I died more times my first time fighting Croco in Bandit's Way than I died in my entire playthrough of Paper Mario. I remember the first time I beat Smithy as a kid. I ran up and down the house annoying the crap out of my family saying, "I did it! I did it!" When I beat Paper Mario for the first time, I just thought to myself, nope, I beat the game. Nice. Paper Mario is just way too easy to provide any kind of challenge. So no, the leveling system in Paper Mario isn't designed to force the player to make strategic choices. It's designed to keep the player from getting confused. This is baby's first RPG, and its leveling system is essentially the video game equivalent of training wheels. So that about does it for the leveling system. What about the equipment we get? In Paper Mario, Mario is the only character who can be attacked by most enemies. Thus, he's the only one who has any equipment to upgrade. His weapon upgrades follow the same linear path as the rest of the game does. You go from regular boots to super boots to ultra boots, and then you go from regular hammer to super hammer to ultra hammer. Unless you're sequence breaking, you can't skip over weapon upgrades, nor can you acquire them out of order. Compare that to Super Mario RPG, where you absolutely can acquire weapons and armor out of order. The first major instance of this comes in Booster Tower, when you can complete a puzzle to acquire a weapon for Mario known as the Masher. this is actually more powerful than the next 2 Mario weapons you can buy in shops, and is equal in attack power to the next one. You can also acquire the Chomp, a weapon for Bowser, while in Booster Tower, which is more powerful than the Chain Chomp, which is the next weapon Bowser is able to acquire. So Super Mario RPG still holds a solid advantage in that regard. However, there is one major mechanical addition that Paper Mario adds to the franchise, and that's the badges. These badges essentially serve the same purpose as accessories in Super Mario RPG, in that they provide a wide variety of utilities, ranging from basic boosts like increased damage to more strategic things like slow health and flower regeneration, to more outside-the-box thinking like the ability to use multiple items in one turn, to various badges that only really apply in the overworld like the Slow Go badge. Frankly, putting together badge combinations is the most fun I have with the game, seeing as it's the only mechanic in the game that actually promotes a higher level of thinking than what would be expected of kindergarteners. However, as much fun as mixing and matching badges can be, if you do it too much, it only serves to bring the rest of the game's shortcomings into even sharper focus. Sure, you can come up with the ideal combination of badges for any one boss fight, but all that really does is take an already stupidly easy game and crushes it into itty bitty pieces. The game was clearly balanced on the assumption that you're not going to be min-maxing your badges, and so optimizing them will effectively enable you to defeat the final boss in only 4 turns. Yeah, no joke, that's actually a legitimate strat. Of course, even Super Mario RPG has some strategy that comes with optimizing your gear. For example, the official strategy guide for that game recommends that you put the Lazy Shell armor and Rare Scarf accessory on Princess Toadstool to max out her defense stats. However, I personally find that the Lazy Shell armor provides more than adequate protection, so I instead equip her with the Safety Ring accessory, which prevents instant death, prevents all status ailments, and eliminates all damage from all elemental attacks. This makes Toadstool into an indestructible tank who can heal all the other party members. It's only at that point that Super Mario RPG becomes the cakewalk that Paper Mario is right out of the gate. But I had to figure out that combination through experience. The game wasn't just this easy by design. So Super Mario RPG takes the point. The equipment in this game is more varied, more versatile, more non-linear, and the one thing Paper Mario's equipment has going for it, the badges and the corresponding opportunity for optimization and strategy, still is only on par with Super Mario RPG. It doesn't surpass it. The main quest isn't the only content in most RPGs. Nearly any RPG worth its salt will also have plenty of side activities worth doing. Seeing as Paper Mario was originally intended to be a direct sequel to Super Mario RPG, it should come as no surprise that the side quests often mirror each other. Note that this section only includes activities in the game that are entirely optional. Quests that deviate from the main quest but which are still mandatory to complete the game, such as rescuing the kids in Mount Lava Lava and Moleville, or recovering the stolen items such as Cooper's Shell and Mallow's Rare Frog Coin, are not counted. I was able to tally 33 side quests between both games, so I can't go through all of them without this video being about an hour longer than it already is, so I'll just give a general overview of the side quests. Side quests can basically be divided into 2 different categories: side quests exclusive to one game and side quests that exist with some variation in both games. So 2 points are up for grabs in this section. There are 4 pairs of side quests that appear in both games. First, there's the super bosses. Jinx and the Master are both optional super bosses you can fight who are supposed to be martial arts masters. In Paper Mario, the 3rd variation of the Master is one of only 2 enemies in the game, the other being the final boss, who has 99 HP, the maximum amount of HP an enemy even could have in this game. Jinx doesn't have much HP, but his instant death attacks, as well as his silver bullet, which technically is an instant death but is so powerful that it might as well be, more than make up for his small HP pool. Kenshi Koopa is an anomaly regarding super bosses. He's initially very powerful, but he has a weakness that you can exploit to make the fight a cakewalk. The Anti-Guy unit is probably Paper Mario's equivalent to Kulix and his crystals. Unlocking both boss fights requires some rather outside-the-box thinking. Kulix requires you to try and open his door with a shiny stone that is in your inventory, which is extremely cryptic. Unlocking the anti-guy unit requires you get one of Bowser's door puzzles wrong. Since this is Baby's first RPG, getting that puzzle right is a literal cakewalk. You honestly have to go more out of your way to fail that puzzle than you do to pass it, so the vast majority of us won't trigger the anti-guy unit fight unless we saw a guide online. In addition to the super bosses, both games have some variation of a game room. In Super Mario RPG, it's called Great Guy's Casino, and it's a great way to get frog coins as well as a unique attack item called the Star Egg. The Star Egg sounds awesome on paper. It's an item that does 100 damage to all enemies regardless of defense level, and it never runs out. However, in my experience, it takes so long to complete its animation that it's honestly not worth it. By the time you reach the stage in the game where you can get that item, you'll already be doing well over 100 damage with each regular attack, and those can be completed in only about a second each, making the fight go by a lot faster. Paper Mario has the playroom, rather than a casino, possibly because paranoid parents would throw temper tantrums if they found out that Baby's first RPG had gambling in it. Of course, one of the two games you can play in the playroom, Jump Attack, is entirely luck-based, so it might as well be gambling. Smash Attack, on the other hand, is mostly skill-based. If you can get 10 Peach cards, then you win the game and win 1 coin for every 10th of a second that remains on the clock. Since it costs 10 coins to play, that means you need to win with more than 1 second left on the clock to turn a profit. However, I find that it is a very inefficient method of grinding for coins because you can just go to the Southern Toad Town item shop, buy 10 Volt Shrooms for 10 coins each, take them to Tasty and have her cook them into 10 different hot shrooms, and then sell those hot shrooms back to the Southern merchant for 15 coins each, providing you with a 50 coin profit with every cycle. So overall, I find the playroom to be a rather watered down version of Great Guy's Casino. As for the boss fights, Paper Mario once again falls short due to one fatal shortcoming. There's no in-game incentive to go and fight the bosses. Now, notice that I said in-game incentive. Some may argue that the bragging rights of saying you defeated the boss is enough of an incentive to go after him. However, if that is the case, then Super Mario RPG's super bosses have that as well. But in addition to that, Super Mario RPG also gives items as rewards for defeating the super bosses. You defeat Jinx in his third form, you get the Jinx belt. You defeat Kulex in his crystals, and you get the Quartz Charm, a super powerful accessory that essentially acts as a permanent Geno boost. What do you get for defeating the anti-guy unit in Bowser's Castle? You get to progress through the dungeon, which is the same reward you get for solving the puzzle and not having to fight them in the first place. What do you get for defeating the third form master? You get a diploma, which doesn't do a damn thing except change some dialogue with some NPCs. Whoop-de-doo! And what do you get for defeating Kensei Koopa? You get absolutely fuck all! Last but not least, there's the manual labor side quests. In Paper Mario, Parakarry wants to recover and deliver the letters he's dropped. This can end up taking you literally all over the game map, going back and forth, back and forth. Meanwhile, in Super Mario RPG, if you rent the suite at the Marrymore Inn and stay longer than 1 day, you'll be charged extra for the extra days you stayed. If you run up a tab that is more than the coins you actually have, you'll be conscripted into working as a bellhop to pay off the remaining debt. Both side quests are annoying and tedious. Most of us play video games to escape from that kind of monotony. However, as annoying as both side quests are, I still have to give the nod to Super Mario RPG in this case, for 2 reasons. First, it doesn't take you all over the game map, and second, it's entirely avoidable and carries no penalty whatsoever for avoiding it. The letter delivery side quest, however, is the only way to obtain every star piece in the game, so you're missing out on rewards if you bypass this extremely tedious quest. Sorry, but Super Mario RPG takes the first of these 2 points. So that leaves us with the side quests that are unique to each game. And if it's any consolation to the Paper Mario fans, I feel Paper Mario has a slight edge over Super Mario RPG on this. Super Mario RPG has more side quests than Paper Mario, but this is a case of quality over quantity. In Super Mario RPG, the Goomba thumping minigame is a great way to get frog coins, but there are so many ways in that game to get frog coins that the Goomba thumping minigame doesn't seem special. The Ghost Flag Hunt is pretty fun, one of the few unique side quests that the game has that's actually really fun and not just a grind fest. Yoster's Isle has a racing minigame that I could never get the hang of. I only ever passed that race once, and that was just by ignoring the in-game advice to tap the buttons in rhythm with the music and instead just press A and B as fast as I could. I likewise could never get the hang of Tadovsky's music side quest, although I was at least able to complete it by referencing my official game guide for the game, which showed screenshots of how the tableaus were supposed to be arranged. By contrast, Paper Mario's side quests usually only offer star pieces as rewards. However, because those star pieces are limited and non-responding, that means that collecting them all is criteria for 100%ing the game. The Little Oink Farm is the only way in the game to obtain infinite versions of the most powerful items in the game, Ultra Shrooms and Jam and Jellies. Not that you'll need it, since Baby's first RPG is stupidly easy without them, but it's the thought that counts. The mail you can read for your companions at the post office contributes to what little character development the protagonists have in this game, and considering how little overt character development they get elsewhere, that essentially tantamounts to a 999% increase in characterization. And there are several back and forth quest lines that yield badges at the end of them, some with more utility than others, but you can't say that it doesn't provide a nice distraction from the main quest. So Paper Mario takes the point for its unique side quests. The score is now 8-5 in favor of Super Mario RPG. But unfortunately for Paper Mario fans, that was the last point to be handed out. Super Mario RPG wins by a country mile. Paper Mario has a superior main story, superior villains, and a superior soundtrack. But once we get down to the gameplay aspect of the games, which is arguably the most important part of any video game, Paper Mario was just completely left in the dust, and it never recovered. Paper Mario is Baby's first RPG, and everything about its gameplay seems to be designed with simple, undeveloped minds in mind. Super Mario RPG has its flaws, sure. All games do. But it continues to provide an entertaining and challenging experience to players young and old. For that reason, my final verdict is that Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars is the game who nostalgias it better. And that will do it for today's video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this analysis, be sure to subscribe for more in-depth analysis of your favorite video games. I have not one but two playlists for you to check out. One which has all my analysis and discussion videos, and another which has my most popular videos chosen for inclusion based on the feedback I receive for each. And don't forget to check out some of my Let's Plays on this channel, where I take a more lighthearted approach to these games and just have a good time. In the meantime, however, I am Acerthorn, and I will see you guys later.